Hi, today I want to read an excerpt for you from my latest audiobook release. The book is a short story collection from A.W. Mason called A Haunt of Travels. And this is a collection of stories that are sometimes creepy, sometimes supernatural, a real wide variety of things. I've left a link in the description. You can go to Audible and purchase the audiobook. If you're an author, I'd love to talk to you about perhaps producing an audiobook for you. All right. So let's get into it. With the back of his hand, Dan wiped the tears and snot away from his face. He opened his eyes and stared out through the streaky doors of the motel. The dirt on the glass tinted the sun, making the outside world seem gray and dead. As he glowered into the dreary landscape, Dan's eyes locked onto movement across the street. Yes, he could see shapes. People, must be people, moving about the convenience store of the Gas and Go adjacent to the motel. The shapes were too small and fuzzy from where Dan sat now, but they seemed to beckon him, like a group of sirens. Bursting through the dirty motel doors, Dan ran across the street to the convenience store. As he reached the front walk, the sun's concentrated spotlight seemed to burn his skin, as if he'd been laboring on a hot roof all day. Closer now, he could make out 3 figures. People, indeed. Women. Dan extended his hand out to push through the door, but paused. The 3 women had their backs turned to him, but something felt familiar about the group. He swallowed and his throat made an audible click. That eerie sensation of death once again rested upon his shoulders. The familiar electronic beep-doo sound emitted from somewhere in the store as Dan pushed one of the front doors open. He made himself put one foot in front of the other, crossing the doorframe as if a pit of serpents filled the space below him. It was cool inside, akin to the motel, but much better smelling. Dan breathed in deep and said, "I think I need help. A phone, maybe? You see, I was in an accident." The 3 women turned to Dan in a synchronized about face. Dan shrunk back against a rack of boxed donuts, not at the sudden movement of the women, but at their familiarity. Dan was right. He knew these women. It was impossible, but he knew them. Impossible because they all lived in Omaha. They were the last 3 women he'd slept with. The 2 on the right knew he had a girlfriend. They were her best friends. The last woman, the one with the flaming red hair, he'd met at his dealer's house. "Hi, Danny boy," smirked the thin blonde in the middle. She sauntered to where he stood, placed her right hand on his cheek, and walked behind him, running her other hand through his sweaty hair. "Carrie," Dan breathed, barely above a whisper. His mind went swimming. None of this made sense. Next, the woman to the right, adorned in a full-length house dress, clothing not quite suitable for this kind of heat, put a heavy hand onto Dan's chest and pushed him back. "Annie and I have been waiting for you. We have the blonde giggled to her friend in the house dress. "Surprise for you, don't we?" Both the girls circled slowly around him while the redhead stood still. Dan closed his eyes, hoping these apparitions would go away. He wanted to move. He wanted to run out of the store, but his legs felt cemented to the ground. He tried to talk, but his throat seemed as though a bag of silica sand had been funneled down it. "How rude, Danny," Annie said, licking the side of his face. for not introducing us to your other friend here. That's all right. Christine and I have already made acquaintance." The redhead bit her lower lip, and Dan could see a trickle of blood run down her chin. She came forward, maintaining eye contact as she threw herself onto Dan. Dan tried to push her off, but again felt like a statue. Christine grabbed the back of his neck and smashed their lips together. Dan felt her hot, sour breath as her slimy tongue entered his mouth. Their teeth clanked together with such force that Dan felt sure he felt an incisor crack. His vision exploded with white-hot pain as little stars danced in his peripherals. Somewhere, as if down a long, far-away hall, he could hear Annie and Carrie cheering them on. The stockroom door flapped open, and another woman appeared. Her shiny brown hair spilled down past her shoulders. She had a thin frame and seemed to float towards them, arms behind her back. Dan's sense of hearing returned from that long hall as the cheers turned to lively welcome squeals for the new woman. Christine, whose face was smeared with blood and saliva, joined in the raucous merriment as Dan drew in air, now free of the face-sucking trance the redhead had had on him. "Danny, you never told me you had a girlfriend. Why don't you introduce us?" Christine asked, turning toward the new woman. Well, Dan's day had started out badly, and it's not going to get any better for a while. So, if you want to know more about how the story goes, please pick up a copy of the audiobook. All right. Thanks. We'll see you next time.